Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning and Test Freight, helping students with Test School and Life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is decoding student loans. But first, let's meet our special guest, Will McGinley.
Will McGinley is an account executive for the PHEAA, Keystone, and PA Forward student loan programs. He brings nearly 20 years of financial aid experience to the role, most recently serving at Baldwin Wallace University, Ashland University, and Liberty University in roles ranging from loan processing to director of financial aid. His career has provided extensive experience presenting to students, families, and higher education colleagues on a variety of topics, including financial literacy, the financial aid process, and gap financing. He has also served on committees for the NCAA and OASFAA. Welcome.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Will, thanks for joining us. You're coming in to tackle a topic that leaves most people, including us, mystified. Before we try to untangle the knot of student loans, we'd love to hear a bit about your background and how you found yourself at this fascinating intersection of finance and education.
Yeah, that is kind of an interesting question because nobody ever starts out their career thinking that they're going to go into financial aid. It's just kind of one of those strange kind of epiphanies that you end up having after you actually start your career. But I actually started out in healthcare and ended up, realizing that, that wasn't going to be the career for me. But, I still liked finance. I still liked dealing with the administrative part of things. And I knew a guy who knew a guy. And that's how I ended up in financial aid. It's just kind of one of those weird kind of situations. But when looking at kind of the way my career has progressed, it's been kind of a unique situation in the fact that I've gotten to be a part of schools that had, over 100,000 students, as well as those mid-sized organizations, looking at the 5,000 student kind of range, and then to a little bit smaller of a university. And it's really given me kind of an idea from the NCAA standards from a Division I, Division II, and Division III school setting that's allowed me to kind of, broaden my horizon as far as what type of students are going to be seen at each one and what type of school is going to be best for each type of student. And at each one of those, you're going to end up having a bunch of different situations, a bunch of different needs. And I've really gotten to enjoy meeting those different types of families, helping people actually achieve their higher education dream and their higher education pursuits.
You're part of the ecosystem of the admissions process that I think that sometimes the contributions of the financial aid specialists is overlooked.
Yeah.
It's, you're essential to the process. You're part of this process. And I know, we're educators. We're in the process. We work with lots of, independent educational consultants and school counselors that are there too. But as far as the ecosystem goes, money makes it run, right?
It does indeed. The interesting thing about financial aid is that it really, because it's one of those few things that you don't really venture into it unless you have to. And so it really is a second language that takes some guidance and takes some experience, personnel. Hopefully the people that you're dealing with at your universities have that. And that's kind of one of those things where if you can end up finding some good financially professionals, someone to talk to and end up leaning on, it can make the process a whole lot easier.
Well, I'm wondering, you've been in, the financial industry for quite some time, and obviously student loans have always been a part of that. I'm wondering, do you feel like student loans and their importance or significance has changed over the course of your career with financial aid?
I would say yes and no. Over the course of my career, the amount that students are leaning on borrowing has grown as cost of attendance have expanded. But when a majority of these schools, particularly looking at private universities, they heavily discount using scholarships and those types of things. But where you're seeing the largest kind of growth right now, at least from what I've seen, is state schools are getting less state money And so the actual gap that you're having to actually cover with tuition is growing at a faster pace than some of these other schools.
Actually,
Even
do you want
though,
to explain real quick for our audience what's a gap?
yeah, so a gap is the difference between the total cost of attendance, which is how much it's going to cost to actually attend that university, and the amount of gift aid or the good stuff that you don't have to pay back. And so that's kind of what you're looking at. So generally speaking, at public universities, historically they've had lower tuition rates because they have been subsidized, or the state has actually given them money to help offset some of the costs of running the university. As that state money starts to get smaller, then they have to end up raising tuition to help offset the costs. Private universities don't get as much state funding. It's usually only need-based money from actual students attending, and so their tuition was always going to be a little bit higher. And so that's kind of the real differentiation between that private and public university.
So you made some observations about
Mhm.
what you've seen, and I'm going to draw some inferences, and I'd love for you to correct me or clarify. It sounds like what you're saying is that even though the retail cost of tuition at private universities has gone up substantially,
Mhm.
so has the aid. So maybe you're saying you haven't seen as large an increase in the amount of loans that your average private school applicant takes out compared to the average public university applicant. You're probably seeing higher loans historically.
So historically, yes. Basically what's happening is, the amount that a public school student is going to be borrowing is growing faster than like the offsetting kind of growth with a private university. Now, if you're looking at the average for a bachelor's degree for a private, nonprofit 4-year school, you're looking at about just under $40,000 in actual loans that a typical student is taking out. Where
A
if you're
year.
looking at a public,
Yep.
no, that's over 4 years.
4 years.
Over
So over
four.
their
Oh,
bachelor's degree. So
did you
it ends
say
up being
private?
so at a private nonprofit 4-year school, you're looking at about $40,000 that a student's going to be borrowing over the course of their 4 years.
That is so much lower than I've heard. That's amazing.
So
That's
so that was published by SoFi in a
yeah.
recent article, and then they noted at a public 4-year it's about 31,000.
Wow.
Uh, so and if you're looking at what the difference is between like a federal loan, and that's for just a bachelor's degree. That's not
Hmm.
for graduate degrees and so on and so forth. But if you're looking at what the federal makeup of that is, that really hasn't changed much in the past, I don't know, decade or so. It's sitting right around $28,000, because that's pretty close to what you can borrow in kind of the
Right, because you
standard
got those subsidized or
4-year.
unsubsidized loans where they're
Correct.
kind of capped, the amount you can borrow through those loans. But then there are other loans, right?
Correct.
Um, and actually, maybe you want to kind of start by talking us a little bit. What are some of the differences between all these various loans, like the federal
Yeah.
DL plus private education loans? Kind of educate us a little bit here.
Yeah. So private loans, we'll start with kind of the borrowing kind of types. So you're going to have the direct student loans. That's going to be an unsubsidized loan and a subsidized loan. The difference between those is how and when the interest actually starts accruing. So um, unsubsidized, is like any other loan that you're going to have out there. It's going to have interest start accruing upon the disbursement of the loan, and that's going to continue to grow as the students in school and so on and so forth. A subsidized loan is a loan that is not going to accrue interest or have interest grow on it while the student is in school. And so between the two loans, these are going to be in the student's name. But between the two loans, the subsidized loan is the better loan.
Right? Because you're not accruing, right? So the
Correct.
ideal loan, if there is an ideal one, would be a subsidized, correct?
Correct. And the brilliance behind the direct lending, student loan program is that it doesn't require any credit history. It's something that it's in the student's name. It's something that they can get without any additional co-signer or anything, or any additional help outside of just filling out the FAFSA
Right, just
and
filling up the
completing
FAFSA.
completing the required steps.
Yeah.
So as a freshman, and as far as the limits, a direct student loan, you can get up to $5,500 as a freshman. Now, depending on your need, so if you have more need, you can end up qualifying for $3,500 of that $5,500 to be subsidized. So that means that breakdown for that federal loans for a student that freshman year would be $3,500 in subsidized and $2,000 in unsubsidized. And so each year, so from your freshman to sophomore year, the eligibility for subsidized grows by 1,000. So it goes to 45 as a sophomore, and then 55 as a junior or senior. So that means by your junior or senior year, you could borrow up to $7,500 in federal.
And this is where we
direct
come up with
loans.
these average amount of loans, is because essentially
Correct.
they're sort of based upon what is it total that you can borrow through these direct loans, correct?
Correct. And then but the reason why it's slightly higher than that actual number is because you can borrow up to 31,000. So if you end up going for a fifth year, there's an additional like $4,000 that you could end up being eligible for. Or if you qualify as a independent student, you have a higher loan limit. That's about 57,000. So that's kind of one of those things that 57.5. That's one of those things that you can end up looking at and saying, hey, that's why that number is above the 27,000 you could end up graduating with based off the loan limits.
Now, you've told us about what I like to call the good loans. Can you tell us a little bit more about what maybe, and correct me in my thinking of the plus and the private education loans? Those are the ones that, as a parent of a college kid, I am not keen on, but tell us more what those are.
Well, so these are typically what we call, our gap financing. So typically when you're looking at a standard offer letter, so that letter you get from the school telling you your eligibility, a lot of times you factor in the student loans as a part of that bottom line. But then there's usually a gap. There's usually going to be some distance between how much you're getting in federal aid and institutional aid and that remaining amount. Then you start looking at, all right, do I need some additional help from a family or somebody that's able to help be a cosigner or something like that can help make up that difference? And then it's going to depend on what your family situation is. So the Federal Plus loan is a loan that is in the parent's name. So that is a loan that is non-transferable to the student, so it would be completely in the parent's name. And so that can be a great loan. It keeps it all under the federal umbrella. And it's something that, if you're looking for ease of just kind of making sure that, we're on one website, we can keep going forward, we can keep doing that. The difference between the plus loan and the direct student loans is going to be a twofold. One, the direct loan, again, is in the student's name. It has a little over a 1% fee, whereas the parent loan is going to be in the parent's name and it's going to have a little over a 4% fee. So that's something that's charged up front that the school never sees and never gets that onto your account. The federal government takes that right off the top. The other difference is that the interest rates for a direct loan is going to be usually about 1.5% lower than like on a plus loan, maybe 2% lower, something like that. So, for this upcoming year, the sub and unsub are going to be at 6.5, and these are fixed rates. Mm-hmm. So that means that the rate does not change over repayment. Mm-hmm. But the plus loan is going to be around 9%. Mm-hmm. So you're looking at, more in fees, more in interest rates. So again, it's a great option, especially if your family, doesn't have as long of an extensive, credit history, because the plus loan does look at credit, but it looks at
so the parent's financial situation could factor into whether or not you're even eligible for someone to give you a loan.
But the reason why the plus loan is such a unique loan is that it looks for something called adverse credit. So you don't have to have good credit to get a plus loan.
You just can't have bad credit.
You can't have adverse credit, correct? So it means you can't have defaulted in the past 7 years. You can't have delinquent payments of over like $2,000.
What about bankruptcies? If a parent had
bankruptcy is also another one of those things that's going to be a red flag. So when that happens, basically the student is eligible for additional unsubsidized loans. So as a freshman and sophomore, they could get an additional $4,000.
Oh, so if your parents wouldn't qualify for the plus, then Correct. All of a sudden direct loans might be willing to kick in more money.
Correct. And so as a junior and senior, you'd be eligible for an additional $5,000. So as an incoming freshman, if you get a denied plus, you could end up getting $9,500 in, direct student loans. And as a senior, it could be 12,500. So that's one of those things where the plus has some advantages right there. Now, if your family has decent credit, and again, it doesn't have to be great, but it has to be what constitutes as it's probably good. A private loan might actually be better for you. And the reason why I say that is, there was a big shift around 2009 as far as, some, we'll call it some shady dealings with just a small population of private lenders that were leveraging schools and
There were a lot of lending issues, let's just say, in the year prior to 2009.
Right. And so what ended up happening is they wrote some legislation and got all that situated and fixed. And now there's very, very stringent rules, very, very tight rules around that. And what's happened is as those rules have been put in place, private lenders have become more and more attractive as far as a lending option. Now, there's going to be a lot of different variety out there. And so I always tell families, lean on your schools. They usually have a list. It might be something called a preferred list, which means that they have set criteria that they're looking to, select certain lenders that have these certain criteria. It may be a historical list. So they look at the past 2 or 3 years and say, these are all the people that have been, that we've been dealing with, that families have chosen. And that's a good place to start. But kind of when you're going through that, looking at the private lending, the reason why I would say it's a little bit better is, generally speaking, they either waive or don't have fees, or the fees are much smaller. So rather than having that 4% off the top, you get basically what you're borrowing. And they also have more variety as far as interest rates. So, they have the 9% as far as the plus loan. That's decent, and it's a fixed rate, which again means that it doesn't change over the course of repayment. But if you're looking for something that might start out lower, or you feel like you have a pulse on what's going on with the credit ratings and everything, that you think they're going to go down, there are options for variable rates with private lenders. So that's something that's out there. There also are fixed rates that you can end up dealing with out there. And so, based off of those two things, that's kind of that kind of big shift there is, looking at your credit history, you can sometimes, get a better rate with lower fees with a private lender if you have a strong credit background. And so that's usually, above a 740, 760 in that range. Anything north of that, you're probably going to have an option as far as going with a private lender. Now, again, it's not guaranteed, but anything north of that, in the top half of the 700s, you're probably going to be able to find a private lender that can end up working out a good interest rate that could compete or exceed or challenge the plus loan.
So for those private education loans, I'm curious, just what are their caps? I mean, like, how much money can one borrow? Because you do hear of students or families talking about how much money. I think, Mike, that's kind of why you were a little bit maybe shocked earlier. How much money you'll hear a family saying, "Well, we borrowed $100,000 for my kids' college tuition." And I'm always like, "What?" So are there caps on those in terms of the amount you can borrow through those kinds of loans?
So yes, if you're doing an educational loan, there are private financing options that you can end up going through, but an education loan is one that's actually approved and fits within and deals with the actual college and all that. But if you're dealing with a loan like that, there are caps, and it's called the cost of attendance, the federal guidelines that you can't exceed. So colleges have to have what I like to refer to as kind of a box that all their aid can fit in. Now, you can have gift aid and you can have self-help aid, and the difference between that is, again, gift aid is the stuff you don't have to pay back. That's scholarships and grants. And then you have self-help aid, like loans, whether it be private or plus or federal, and any type of student employment. So all that has to fit in the cost of attendance box. And the cost of attendance box has your tuition and fees, anything that's charged by the university, whether it be room and meals and all that. But it also has indirect costs or stuff that's not charged by the university, but is associated with going to college,
like books or travel,
correct. Books,
things like
travel
that.
expenses, buying a computer, things like that. That's all part of that. And so that cost of attendance box is how much, they can't exceed that. So, if you're going to a school that costs, 40,000, but, they have incidental costs of another 8, so you can borrow up to 48, but you have 24,000 in gift aid and aid. So that cuts it in half. So there's only 24,000 remaining in that box. You can only borrow up to 24,000 in that kind of box. Now, again, that's a generalized kind of, kind of number there, but that's kind of how that works. Now, for the private loans, most of them, and I will say most, not all. So again, shop around what works best for you and your family. But they generally will allow you to fill that entire gap. So that additional 24,000 that we had just referenced, you can fill that entire if you wanted to. Now that's going to be dependent on what you and your family can afford based off of debt to income or your credit rating. And so that's going to end up kind of being a variable there. But generally speaking, it's cost of attendance minus other aid.
So, Will, all things being equal, what student loan option is best for most applicants?
Yeah, so I'll give everybody's favorite answer in financial aid, which is it depends.
Sounds like admissions.
I was afraid of that.
But I'll give you a unique situation for me and my family. So I have 2 teenage boys. I have a junior in high school, soon to be a senior, and a freshman. And something I've been talking with them about is saying, all right, I don't make enough to be able to pay all this out of pocket. But I do know that the schools that I've worked with and the schools that, we're looking at, they do have payment plans. So, okay, let's say we have $20,000 a year that we have to come up with. I have enough where I can say, okay, I can end up doing $10,000 a year. I'll do that. I'll sign up for a payment plan. It's going to be about $1,000 a month. I'll do that. Okay. At that point, we have another 10,000 remaining. I've told my boys, hey, I need you guys to work on campus to get something done, whether it be, a resident assistant, so an RA, whether it be working, for me personally, I worked in a dish room and a laundry room in college. So it's like you can find jobs, but you're only going to be able to make a couple $1,000s doing those types of things.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
I don't even know what the status of work study is anymore, but I don't think that rate has kept up with the cost of attendance.
For sure.
I delivered
Right.
Chinese food to get through college, and I don't think you could do that anymore.
No, but then you're going to have a remaining gap. And so let's say it is an additional $6,000 or something like that you're going to end up having to borrow. So for me, I don't think you have to necessarily look at that full gap and say it all has to be financed. It's something you can end up being kind of creative in how you end up piecing parts together. And I don't want you to forget about, even as a returning student, looking at outside scholarships. I've known families that went in, having to pay a certain amount out of the year, but because they were doing well in their actual program of study and they were getting some internships, they actually financed their junior and senior years fully on outside scholarships.
Yeah, we know
I've heard of
plenty
that.
of students who have done that. And
Mhm.
of course, the value of test scores and high grades and getting what you refer to as gift aid, which I really like that, it's
Right.
like the money that you don't have to pay back.
Yep. And so, when trying to look at those outside scholarships, it's about creating and crafting your own story. It's what is going to separate you and kind of lift you up, and being able to separate yourself from the other people that be seeking this additional free money. And again, as you start to get more and more experiences and have, it's not just based off the test scores, but that is definitely a huge part of it, especially as the transition into college. My son just finished up taking his SAT, and we're all kind of waited with bated breath to see how
I
he
think
did.
scores
But
come out today.
okay,
As of,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
so
He's like, wait, I got to check now.
I know.
How much does that convert to?
Well, that's kind of the funny thing is, I'm always looking at different schools' net price calculators to see how my son's going to be doing. But
Yeah.
But no, the reality of it is I am going to have to end up borrowing some in some capacity. And so for my
And
boys,
what loan are you going to look to first?
Yeah, tell us, Will.
You're the expert, so
We wanna
you
know.
have an answer.
I might be a little bit biased on that one, just based off of the fact my company does have a couple different private loans, but I'm looking for something that has no fees, something where I can get a low fixed rate, ideally better than the 9% that the plus loan is going to be giving. Because for me, I'm debt adverse. That's something that I don't like to take on debt unless I have to. So that's kind of one of those things where I can figure out how much I can afford on that annual basis and try to say, hey, this is how much we can actually afford. I don't want to borrow anything beyond that. But when looking at that, I mean, there are different loan calculators that are out there, and so end up finding a good one like that. And I know they have different loan calculators on studentaid.gov, and there's a bunch of other ones that are out there. But that's something that you should end up kind of looking into to figure out what is going to be right for you and your family. And as you're going through the whole college process, as far as looking at which college is going to be right for you, I had a friend that used to say that there are many different paths to the same degree, and that you're actually buying the education and not the school. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be getting to your dream school, but you're going to be getting the same type of degree. And really, a lot of hiring managers aren't necessarily looking for that specific school. Sure. They're looking to say, hey, can they complete the steps? Have they shown that, like a history of time management and building knowledge base and all those different things? That's what they're looking for. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to go to a certain school, but that you're pursuing and trying to invest in yourself and invest in your future. That's the important part.
So when do students start applying for student loans? Like, what's the timeline of that?
Generally speaking, you can start the whole federal application process. So the FAFSA in October, generally speaking. Then you want to end up, if you're going to be doing the FAFSA and going with the direct student loans, you're going to have to do something called entrance counseling. And that's an open book quiz that the federal government requires. It takes about 35 to 45 minutes.
And you do that online, don't you? They do it online.
Yeah, it's all online. Everything with the government is currently online. And then you have to do something called a master promissory note. And that master promissory note is your contract with the federal government saying, yes, I'm going to repay this loan. Those two things will take care of, your federal loans. And so that should honestly be done by May, June timeframe to make sure everything is in place for the upcoming fall start. At most schools, you only have to do that once over the course of your bachelor's degree, your 4-year degree, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're looking at the plus loan and private loans, so that additional gap financing, most schools issue their actual first bill like the first week of July.
Yeah.
So that's going to be when if you're concerned about getting a precise number, meaning I only want to borrow exactly what I need to pay. That's going to be when you're going to start that process, is the first week of July. I would say in most cases, you can start a little bit earlier in that June timeframe to kind of get the process going. And then you can always reduce the loan as you need to. And after that fact, that way all your finances are in order going into the fall semester.
That's fantastic. Will, we still have plenty of questions, but unfortunately we are out of time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, not a problem. Glad to be here.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, emailing me at william.mcginley, and that's WILLIAM.MCGINLEY @PHEAA.org. That's PHEAA, PHEAA.org.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer, including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Tests and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.